Hi, everyone. I'm George Christie with Wine Industry Network. Welcome to the second episode of our educational webinar series. Today's guest host is Jamie Gilchrist, co-founder of vintrace, joining us from Down Under. Jamie, welcome.
Hi, George. How are you?
Great. Thanks for being with us today.
No problem. I'm excited to be here. We've got a great topic to discuss.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, to that point, Jamie and the team at vintrace pitched us on what we thought was a really interesting topic: lessons from Down Under. What did winemakers in Australia and New Zealand experience during harvest with no heads up, right? During the pandemic. And what advice did they have for their North American counterparts? We obviously love the idea, so here we are. Now, in the spirit of transparency, because of the time difference, this was not one that we were able to do live. However, Jamie was willing to get up bright early today so we could take some questions at the end. And thanks again for that too, Jamie. What time did you get up this morning?
I got myself up at 2:30 this morning so I could freshen up and try to look fresh. It's nice and crisp here in Melbourne. It's 3.5 degrees Celsius. I think that's about 38 in your language up there. But no, I'm excited to be here. It's a great topic, and I'm looking forward to this.
Great. Well, we're going to play the recorded webinar, and then Jamie and I will be back to join all of you viewers here at the end in about half an hour and take some questions. Jamie, is there anything else you'd like to add before we cut to the session?
Let's get to the session. But I will just add that the panelists, they're great guys. We get along with them, and this all came around just from some casual chats with those guys, and we were so happy they agreed to join us. And let's go to the videotape, I guess.
All right, sounds good. We'll see you in about half an hour.
Will do. Cheers, mate. Thanks for joining us, folks. We've got with me online on Zoom. We've got Dan Buckle, is the winemaking director out at Dineen, Shandong, Australia, out in the beautiful Yarra Valley. Nikolai St. George, who's the chief winemaker at Geeson in Marlborough, New Zealand. And we've got Jeremy Dineen, chief winemaker and general manager at Joseph Cromie. And Jeremy's actually, he's definitely the longest term customer we've got on this meeting. In fact, we first met Jeremy, I think, back probably in 2005 or 2006, before we even launched the product, and you were replying to questionnaires we were sending out to people about whether they like a system or not, if I recall.
Yep.
All right. So look, we've been having some chats with these guys, and we thought they had some interesting stories. We're just gonna go through some questions here about how they dealt with the harvest period through lockdown, particularly in that there was no real time for planning around it. It happened all after you guys would have made all your plans and everything. So you were really having to think on your feet, which I guess isn't new for winemakers at all, but certainly this was things you've never had to deal with at all. So, starting off with that, if you had warning ahead of time, what would you have done differently, or what would you have set in place? Maybe we'll start with you, Dan.
We would have ordered another 1,000 litres of ethanol to get ahead of the sanitation problem. I wouldn't have employed a bunch of Kiwis and people from Europe because they all left in a great big hurry, and that was a bit of a problem. I suppose we might have started a little bit earlier to get it all going sooner, because with the general shortage of people and having to work strangely, it would have been nicer to have a bit more time.
And how about you, Jeremy?
Pretty much the same as Dan. Hand sanitizer was in desperately short supply. We may or may not have fired up a small research still to make our own. And we lost. We're a smaller winery than Shandong, but we still bring in 8 interns for harvest, and we lost 4 of them literally in the second week, just as things were really kicking off. So that was really tough. And I'm not sure you can plan for something like that. But knowing, I guess if we had had more notice, I would have planned better communication with our growers, our own staff, our contract winemaking customers, and certainly all the people who were delivering fruit. And I would have put better signage in. There's 100 things I would have done different or better, but we just didn't have the time.
And how about you, Nikolai?
Yeah, it sort of happened just as we were beginning. And so the timing was, it was actually, if it was any 2 weeks later, we would have been in big trouble. We already had a lot of interns in. They had been there for a couple of weeks at least just to enjoy New Zealand. So we employ about 49 people to come in from, I think this year we had 30 different nationalities. So we were very lucky, but I would have liked to have had a few more Kiwis as well, just to try and keep a bit of stability. But in saying that, we only lost a couple of Americans and not too many other people. So we were very lucky in that instance, but it could have gone very, very wrong had it been a little bit later for us. Now, as far as what else could we have done differently, then communication and setting up very good communication. So online facilities like we're doing now with Zoom, looking at handover sheets, because what happened with us is that we all separated out into 2 major shifts. These 2 major shifts were housed independently from each other. So that kept it very much in a sort of a night shift bubble and a day shift bubble. And it meant that we could never see each other so I never saw the day shift and they never saw the night shift. So we had to ensure we had a very good process for handing over all documents from the press area, flotation, filtration, and also intake. So each department had to write quite concise notes. So have a better systems there, better setup to ensure that everything is covered there so that we could write notes throughout the night. I think that would have been very good. So a proper system where we could accumulate all that information together. And signage and everything else for sure. And I guess just trying to create more paperless business. So having as much paperless as possible, because there's contact points coming from out of the winery, like from the vineyard, those receivable dockets coming into the winery, and also additives. When we order additives, you have receivable invoices and everything like that that go with the additives that people hand over, the truckies hand over, to ensure that everything that we did was paperless. Then that would have been amazing, made it a lot easier for us, because in the end we ended up taking photos to ensure that things weren't handed over, so there wasn't that contamination coming through. Sure.
And I was speaking to a site on Wednesday, just a couple of days ago, and they were telling me even within their shifts they had sort of pods, if you will. So they've got teams where they're not even allowed in the same room. So they're working in one section of the winery and another. Did any of you guys do any of that? So if somebody comes down with something in that pod, they just have to isolate that one pod, and everyone else will be able to continue on working maybe with a bit more load. Did anyone do anything like that?
We did it to a degree where we had separated. So, of course, no one was allowed 2 meters from each other, less than 2 meters from each other. And then we'd have lunchroom segregation, especially during the day shift. And so there'd be only a certain team and a certain amount were allowed into that lunchroom at one time. So that sort of helped try and keep that separation as well, to try and decrease any contact points and decrease anything getting in or anyone else getting affected. And then food was a big thing as well. We get all our food catered for, and so we had to ensure we had a very strict team catering for all the food, because if someone there infected the food, then that could infect everyone within that winery, and also some of our vineyard get that food as well. So that would just absolutely spread like wildfire. So food was a big thing.
Yeah.
And we ended up getting a chef from the Cook Strait Ferry, because the Cook Strait Ferry had shut down, and he had a lot of experience in stomach, viruses and all those sorts of things, and how to ensure that those sorts of things were not spread. And so he was very good at his hygiene and practices and systems.
Yeah. So a chef, catered by a chef through Harvest at a Geeson.
Yeah, that's the place to be.
I know where I'm going to volunteer 1 year for some experience. I guess, Jeremy, maybe I'll go to you for this one. What was the biggest impact of isolation on Harvest? I guess both from a work-wise and do you think there's been any impact on quality?
I'll answer the second part first. I actually don't think there's been an impact on quality, because, as you say, in wineries, you're used to adapting and getting through vintages, because Harvest throws a different challenge at you every year, and if you can't adapt to challenges, then you're in the wrong game. But the biggest impact on us was losing half of our staff, because unlike Geeson, we take in a small amount, but losing 4 out of 8, it was a massive impact. So we had to find replacements locally. Fortunately, we were able to find somebody very experienced in laboratory. We were able to find somebody who used to work for us many years ago who could come back and work the crush pad. So we got through. The other big impact was the vineyard visits. I mean, normally either myself or one of the other winemakers would spend quite a bit of time actually out visiting vineyards with our growers, and actually talking to them, working out what we're going to do with each block, what they've been doing in the vineyard for the past weeks, months, etc. And having that direct sort of face-to-face contact with the vineyards cut off was quite difficult. There were a couple of people who could grab the phone and give you a Zoom or a FaceTime through the vines, but it's not the same as walking through, tasting grapes with people and making those decisions at the time. Yeah.
Nikolai, I think you mentioned some challenges around that, sort of the fruit sampling and fruit as well.
Yeah, that's right. And that's usually my day-to-day job, is, looking at premium vineyards and going out and walking through them and discussing with the viticulturist and trying to formulate a bit of a plan. And then not being able to do that, I was shifted to night shift to ensure that the night shift had a solid team. So if the day shift got shut down, then we'd actually have a team that could keep going and have everyone there that was needed to be there. So that sort of changed my role completely, and was back on the tools and not out in the vineyards. And so, it's trying to work with the viticulturist and slow them down. They when you're not out there, man, they pick fast. They're keen to get on holiday. As soon as that fruit's out, then they're off work. So they see the influence when you're not in the vineyard, and they pick some nights it was another 50% more on top of what you expected that night to be picking, because that just go for it. Even though you allocated the blocks that you thought we should be picking, they would just try and slip a little bit more in there, because they knew that was an extra day that they would shave off the end of vintage. Yeah. And anything I was unsure about, they would actually send me in bags, very, very hygienically, cut out bags, clean plastic bags and everything else, and they'd send me the fruit in, and I'll be able to taste certain parcels that they had question marks about, and then we could have a conversation about them from there. So, there was some massive changes for sure, and it is quite a bizarre feeling to not see what's happening, and every night to come in and it's like a surprise. You don't know exactly what you're getting, and you end up grading each bin that comes in. So we get them in the 400 kilogram totes, and we'd have to grade each bin according just to make sure that it was to spec before we put it into our tanks for our red wines especially. So yeah, some drastic changes to how we did things, and I think the viticulturists loved it really.
Yeah.
We went in the vineyards annoying them.
There is one advantage to that, Nick. You don't have to pick so many grape samples yourself, though.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, there's always bonuses to everything.
And what about yourself, Dan? What was that biggest impact there around that period?
I suppose splitting the team in half and working, alternate timings became a bit of a crunch point because you can only get so much done with a smaller crew. So, we talk about quality, but you make a few decisions which are always a bit of a compromise, just to keep it all moving and things flowing through the winery. And we're sort of fortunate that we've had a pretty light harvest, so that in some respects has been a blessing, not normally would be. But, so it's been a bit of a challenge and a really unusual season, and having not being able to talk face-to-face with people who you would normally work with has been quite an interesting experience. And really, internally, you have to really pump up the communication and record keeping so you know where everything's up to. And I suppose for us, we've had to chop back a number of the trial and experimental or wacky winemaking stuff that we would normally be playing around with just to keep things a little bit more simpler and streamlined.
When we were speaking, Dan, you were talking about the blending and sort of the challenges around blending and sort of on a Zoom meeting.
So I've got two other winemakers I work with, and Glenn, who's got a red hot palate, he's on the other team. So we made a commitment pretty early that we were going to keep really good notes. We use the notes feature on vintrace, but you could do it on a spreadsheet. But just every time a sample comes across the bench, everything that goes through the lab for analysis, we take a bit of a note on to build up a bit of a rich resource about what we think about the wines and where they're destined to go. So, obviously each parcel has its own destiny from pruning pretty much, but just to make sure we're really keeping track of that and having a lot of shared opinions in a digital space, which is really quite difficult when you normally work side by side and you're chatting about the wines and I like this or I don't like that and this should be good for that and this is going well, this is not. That's all of that sort of background conversation lost, so you have to find a way to replace it. And like keeping it in the notes for each batch has been really helpful, particularly now as we're starting to come into blending time.
Yeah,
we found the same thing, Jamie, was that the communication side of it became very, very difficult the longer that vintage went on. At the start it was all good and there was no major problems, but then, it started to get a bit more tension as things went along. And we also use that notes function, but in a slightly different way with the viticulturists. So grading-wise, they would grade things in the paddock, in the vineyards, and they could grade things. And then we have that coming up in our receival intake spreadsheets, so we can see any gradings or any comments there. They come through, like if there's any botrytis or if there's any issues that come through, then we can make all that work. And so that was pretty helpful too.
Yeah, it's great. So I guess, physically, what did you do physically different for enforcing the sort of social distancing? Is there lines on the ground or gaffer tape used everywhere, or how did that work?
The guys, what they did, they got a can of Spates, which is Southern beer, and they mapped it out. How many cans of Spates is 2 meters, and so that gave everyone a relative understanding of how long 2 meters was by the amount of cans of beer there was.
Oh. I've measured cooking time on beers before, but never distances, so that's certainly a new one there. What about you, Jeremy? Did you guys do anything physically different?
Well, I was on the tools a lot more than I would normally be because we had less staff. But for us in a smaller team, it's a little bit more difficult to isolate. And we still had 2 shifts, night and day. But each person on the shift had their own area. There was a bit of overlap, but as little as possible. But because this happened, sort of in the beginning of harvest, we've already started picking. We couldn't, sort of down tools and paint lines on the floor and get pretty stickers and posters everywhere. So it, we didn't get the chance to do a lot of implementation of really regimented things for physical distancing. We shut our restaurant, of course, and we had a lot less visitation. So that made it easier because it really was only our own team and the delivery people. The vineyards who were bringing their samples in, like we set up an area so that they could basically drop their samples. There's a table, everything's marked. There's hand sanitizer there. They can clean up when they drop the samples, and they could just put them there and leave. So they didn't have to be in contact with anybody. In terms of our of when we were unloading fruit from trucks, we tried to make sure that the drivers kept their distance. That was a little more difficult, particularly in a really busy environment where there's fruit potentially coming in 24 hours a day. But the biggest difficulty there was people not having a pen to sign a document. So I think I can't remember if it was Nick or Dan saying before, like moving all of that to paperless would have been like quite advantageous for us. We could do our own intake paperless, but a lot of the delivery drivers needed their particular documentation signed, and that was probably the most difficult thing to keep the social distancing in place.
Sure. And so what kind of technology was being used for, or did you start using for that paperless activity?
Well, for us, obviously we can do all of our fruit intake via vintrace if we need. For people who actually had a paper delivery docket, rather than take those delivery dockets, we were just taking a photo of it, and so that photo could then be emailed from a phone or uploaded and actually attached to the vintrace intake. So we just tried to work around things like that. But particularly for small vineyards, small growers and regional rural carriers, a lot of them don't even have actually a PC in their office, let alone the capability to go paperless. Some of them still struggle to use a mobile phone.
And yourself, Dan, what technologies there would help around that?
We have an iPad at the fruit receival that covers all of that stuff, so that can be nice, comfortably paperless. Getting the drivers to stay in their vehicle as much as possible and keeping the distance. That sort of technology works pretty well. I mean, having the app on your phone, you can keep track of things. So I think, if this had happened 5 years ago, we would have been really stuck. But between current internet technology and computers and phones, it's actually, of course, we've all had to get up to speed with all these platforms pretty quickly, but it's possible, doing Zoom meetings and tastings, or, of course, you're talking on the phone to people all the time, and there's nothing like talking on the phone to people. I have to say, you lose so much nuance on the chat and on the email, and there's 10 times the value in just getting on the phone and calling someone. So we made, like I said before, we made a big commitment between our teams to just make sure we'd answer the phone, and I've got a couple of guys who are really guilty of that. They just ignore their phone. I don't know why they carry it around most days, but in this time, just say, look, if I'm calling you, I need to talk to you. I'm not joking, might be quite immediate. So it's a real thing. So getting everyone on the same page. And I was going to say, one of the things that we're only getting up to speed with now, which would have been awesome before this all kicked, is some proper training about everything to do with COVID-19 and, hand sanitation, spread of virus. And, we're all pretending we're armchair immunologists at the moment, but there's a great diversity of knowledge and awareness out there, and you'd be surprised what some people think and where they're getting their information from. And so, here we've got Deakin Uni in Victoria starting to do courses just to sort of certify people that they've been through this, they understand of not spreading a disease if you're potentially asymptomatic. So that's late for us. It would have been great 4 months ago. But, if I had any warning, I would have done that immediately, because I remember looking out the window and seeing one of the truck drivers standing there, and he sneezed into his hands and wiped it on his jeans, And I'm like, oh, God, this is what we're dealing with. Okay.
For a high five.
Exactly. So there's a great diversity of awareness and knowledge out there in the community and with your people. And as soon as everyone gets up to speed with the proper science of it, I think the safer everyone can be.
Yeah. Do you think, so let's sort of throw this out to the group, and you can all answer, but do you think there's anything that you've done differently that'll stick around even after the pandemic sort of ends and where we go? Is there sort of any lessons that you'll retain and you work practices that you might not have implemented otherwise and are going to stick around for good?
Yeah, looking at things, definitely the paperless side of it. We're pushing more and more for paperless now because we're finding there's quite good efficiencies there. And it's actually easier to trace. So searching for certain dockets or information, we can actually search for it quite easy because it's all there on file, and anyone can find it whenever they want. Because that's what we had. We had all our receival area going from the vineyard, photos taken, sent through to the weighbridge area. They would pull that up with a license plate on it, and then they would match that to the truck coming in. So they could see what trucks were coming. So, we might have 3 or 4 trucks on the road and of a certain block, but they could see exactly when they left the farm gate. So they knew that those trucks were coming, to expect them, and then to make sure that they had presses ready for them. So there was some really good stuff there, and it helped create some organisation. Now, of course, the communication side of it was very, very important, and really being a lot more, like Dan's saying, a lot more diligent about the communication side of it, and being structured and ensuring that we're making the effort to talk to people every day, and being very effective about that. And cleaning, we cleaned a lot, and that was a big thing for us. Between each shift, we cleaned everything. And that included all touchable services such as balustrades, kitchens, and then also forklifts and other areas, high touch zone areas. And so that actually, I think, helped decrease any people on sick days. So I think, usually you get a cold or a flu or can even get a stomach virus going through the vintage crew. And we didn't have any of that this year. I don't know if we had about 2 or 3 people off for sick days over a 2.5 month period. So that there is massive in itself from just getting people to work and keeping people fit and healthy. So there's some massive gains there for sure.
I'm really enjoying the clean lunchroom. Normally by the end of harvest, the lunchroom looks like a teenager's bedroom. It's a debacle. This has given us the impetus to keep on top of it and keep things clean and tidy, which has been a refreshing change. Yeah.
And Jeremy?
I'd echo that, Dan. Like our kitchen has never been so clean, and it's quite a pleasure to walk in the morning and make a cup of tea or make a sandwich. But it was certainly a challenging vintage, and you know, we had some different challenges to I mean, last year we had a fruit fly infestation in a couple of parts of Tasmania, so we had to adapt to moving things in and out of restricted zones, and I thought that was a real pain in the ass. But yeah, this was far more difficult. But as with the others, we will keep we'll keep some of the changes we've made. You know, I'm probably not going to, once our restrictions have eased, I'm not going to keep an hourly record of who's wiped down the door handles. But we will still keep cleaning. But it actually forced a lot of people in our company to move to digital platforms, where we've got some people, particularly in our administration side, who are, you know, really stuck with old school paper documentation. And I think there's actually been some positives out of this for us. It's just they have come at quite a bit of a headache and a few grey hairs.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's the Zoom meetings and all the online meetings certainly get up and running a lot quicker and easier than they used to. At the start, trying to have a chat to mum and dad, it would be, you know, and them off to the side, and now they're logged in and they're just champs on all the technologies. So it's fantastic. Well, I think that'll probably do for that, guys. Thanks so much for your time. You know, I'll certainly make sure I pop in and visit you all next time I'm in the area. Dan, you'll probably be first, being only 45 minutes down the road from my house, but the Tasmania still needs to open its borders, and we need the bubble, the Trans-Tasman bubble, to get across to New Zealand.
It's going to be great when it opens up. Hopefully we have a Pacific bubble, you know. We could have Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. That's all we really need, isn't it?
That would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. But yeah, no, thanks very much for your time, guys. And yeah, it was really informative, and I really appreciate you guys making the effort. Thank you.
Pleasure.
No worries.
All right. Cheers, guys. Bye.
See you later.
See ya.
See you guys. Nice to meet you, Nick.
Yeah.
Jamie, thanks. That was terrific.
No, it's good. I'm quite relieved. I had two shirts to pick from this morning, and I almost picked the one I had on that video then, and I thought everyone will be thinking I've only got the one shirt to wear, so I'm happy I've got a different one on today.
That's good. Hey, we had a few questions that I wanted to throw your way. So they talked about not being able to get out into the vineyards, and I was curious about this as well. But what was one of the questions is, you know, why weren't they able to get out into the vineyard? What prevented that?
Yeah, I thought that. And I don't think it was get the guys to maybe clarify. I don't think it was so much getting out there physically on your own. It was getting out there and working with the growers, and certainly during the picking and being in close with the team, the sort of the in close work that they did separately. And, you know, and all the, I guess, protocols being set up was, if even coming in this morning, there's signs on all the freeways. If you don't have to go somewhere, don't go somewhere. So I think at the beginning it was just as much around, well, we don't have to go there, so we won't take that risk. But yeah, I did see that question, and yeah, going out on your own to taste some fruit, I'm sure would have been fine, but to get in with the grower and right in amongst the action happening there would be just to keep the two workplaces separate.
Yep. There was another question that talked about how they manage digging out the tanks.
Yeah, we're going to have to go to the guys on that one. Fortunately, in my role, I don't have to get in there and dig out tanks with the customers. But I'm guessing, in that confined space on the tank, it'd have to be a one-person job. I know in offices you can't have elevators full, so it'd be similar protocols around that, I'd imagine. But we can certainly fire that question off to the guys and get their response on that.
Yeah, that would be great. And I think there are a few more that were definitely specific for the guys. So, that'll be something that we can package up and push out to all of the registered attendees. Make sure those questions are answered. I have a couple more quick questions for you. they talked a lot about the importance of communications and leveraging technology. And so obviously, you know, vintrace is a platform that does all it. Can you tell me a little bit about how vintrace has had to adjust with COVID and some of the things that maybe you guys are doing a little bit differently with your clients?
So yeah, a lot of obviously online, which I mean, we've been using online meetings since day dot with the company. But my preference personally is getting out there and visiting customers, being on site, seeing the problems. You know, if it's a pre-sales meeting, seeing the environment and what we want to do. If it's a post-sales implementation, seeing no two wineries are the same. So we've lost that ability, and it's a great industry that we work in. I'd be lying if I didn't say I'm missing getting out on the road and driving through to all the wonderful places I get to go to. Yeah. So yeah, it's just doing more and more of our day-to-day online and supporting for there. So it's really the online training's the big one, and all the customers that have come on board and have had online training, whereas we'd normally be out on site for that. We've certainly told them that once everything opens up and starts getting back to normal, we'll be able to come out for some site visits and just make sure everything's fine. But those online meetings is now the norm, and we don't get to visit the pretty areas around the world.
Yeah. So I know that this was obviously covered right out of the straight out of the gate, but if you could just recap maybe the top 3 or 4 recommendations that you have for our North American winemakers on what they could be doing right now to make sure they're better prepared than the folks down in the Southern Hemisphere were.
Sure, I think it's that planning now, as the guys said. Fruit was already coming in when all the lockdowns and the rules were coming in place, and policies were being made by the government, legislations by the government, and rules were being really made on the fly. And these guys are in the busiest period of time. So, as Dan said, educate yourself not only on the sort of how to control it, but also the requirements. And Jeremy pointed out they didn't have time to paint out lines or create spaces that you need to do. So I'd really be using this sort of heads up now. Yeah, everyone's got time to prepare for that. The communication is a must. Even within our office here, we've all had to get used to picking up the phone where you'd normally just pop your head over a desk and ask a quick question. So just keeping the communication up. And for a work thing, but that's also good just for your your own headspace. A big part of us calling each other within the office was to have a conversation and check out how everyone's going. Right. Keeping that communication and writing those things down. I really like Dan's story around the blending and how, because that's such a collaboration within winemaking, and so to get everyone's opinions when you can't all be in the same room doing it all at the same time. So having those notes, in which obviously Dan's using vintrace, which is fantastic, but he says just whatever technologies you've got to be able to keep those notes and get at them, so you can see everyone's thoughts and opinions. And the stepping up, I think they all talked about being back on the tools again. I think they were, as the winemakers and chief winemakers and directors of winemaking, they're not so much on the tools anymore, but certainly this year they were. Jeremy called me afterwards, actually, the meeting, saying, "Oh, I forgot to throw something in around that," and it was the making sure everyone's trained across all the elements. So you might have people who've never worked in the lab, but might have to go into the lab if you lose some people in there, or vice versa. So I guess getting that that
cross-pollination of skills as best as you can, so that if you lose some resources unexpectedly there, you can fill that up. So a real team effort, I guess, is, which, you know, everyone does typically, but just, you know, being aware of that and getting ready for it.
Yeah, no, it just brings out, you know, oftentimes a crisis brings out innovation, right, and resourcefulness, and so we're seeing that across the board. Of course, you know, our winemakers here, we're dealing with heading into bottling season, right? So having to navigate their way through bottling season when they're running into a lot of the same issues that they'll be running into as we head into harvest. Well, Jamie,
funny you should mention that. We're thinking of doing the opposite day session, so we might be speaking to some of our customers up there and playing that for our down under customers around bottling. So yes, we're thinking about
that. Maybe that's something else that we can work with you on. But Jamie, I know we've got a bunch of questions that are for your panelists, so we'll make sure we have those. And to our audience, anybody who's registered, you're going to be able to have access to those answers. We'll make sure we push those out. Nick, if you can put up Jamie's contact information, we've got a slide here. So this is how you get in touch with Jamie directly if you have any specific questions for him. And Jamie, I want to thank you. I want to thank vintrace. I want to thank all of the attendees that joined us today to listen to our lessons from Down Under. And I look forward to seeing you again in person, hopefully in a not too distant future.
Hopefully, yeah, not too distant, but yeah, as soon as I can, I'll certainly get across there and we'll catch up for a drink, no doubt about it.
Sounds good. Jamie, thanks again. You have a great day and get off to start your weekend.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, mate. You have a great day too.
Take care.